for joining us for another episode of Tea and Trowels, the Florida Public Archaeology Network series where we chat with archaeologists about their research and what archaeology means to them. I'm one of your hosts, Emily Jane Murray, and today I'm joined by Dr. Katherine Ness Swanson, a historic archaeologist and a new professor of history at Principia College in Illinois. Congrats on the job and thanks for joining us, Katherine.
Thanks, Emily Jane. It's great to be here.
Would you like to say anything else about yourself and then tell us about the mug you brought?
Sure. Well, I love FPAN. I have done some things with you guys for years in my research in St. Augustine. So I'm really glad you're doing virtual programs and I'm enjoying watching your Tea and Trowels series. My mug today is a reproduction 18th century stoneware mug that I think I won as a prize when I worked at Colonial Williamsburg as a kid. So whenever I'm in Williamsburg, this is my mug of choice. And right now I'm drinking a jasmine green tea that I have been basically keeping on tap during quarantine. I've drank a lot of it. So I'm grateful for another excuse to drink some.
Awesome. Well, I was reading up on some of your research and I was inspired by some of the sites that you studied here in St. Augustine. And one of your observations was that you found a lot of evidence of specifically mugs used for hot chocolate versus mugs for like tea or for coffee. So I pulled out a very special fun mug. It has Babar on it and it's one that I had as a kid. And I used to take it camping and this is what I drink hot chocolate out of when I went camping. So it's my chocolate mug.
Excellent. Well, cheers.
Cheers. So what made you want to become an archaeologist?
Well, it started when I was 7 years old. I was studying King Tut and I went to the library to do my first research project and had a lot of questions. The librarian, however, did not know the answers. And she kept looking at me thinking, why won't this child shut up? And I couldn't figure out why she didn't know the answers because, you know, a librarian has all of human knowledge at their fingertips. So of course they would know everything about King Tut. And I distinctly remember sitting in the car on the ride home. The librarian finally said, no one knows the answers. And I thought, okay, well, then I'm going to have to figure them out. And I couldn't spell archaeology at the time. I didn't know that that was a career option, but I knew that's where I was headed. And I've been a lost cause ever since.
That's fun. I love those moments as a kid where you're like, oh man, adults don't have all of the answers.
It was definitely a turning point.
So tell us about your research, what you've been studying, what you've gotten into as a professional archaeologist. And we were trying to limit it to 30 seconds, but we're all way too long-winded. So 30 seconds, a minute, we'll take it.
Well, I'll try to be quick. Unfortunately, I have two projects that I've been working on for a while. So the first one has to do with my work in museums. And I've worked at several museums where I've gotten to get involved with digitizing collections. And I really get excited about that because you get instances like this pandemic where people are not able to go and physically look at the collections themselves. And when you have those digital resources, whether it's pictures or databases or photogrammetry with the 3D scans, you can keep the research going. So I've been working on that with several museums. And then my other project feeds into some of the work you were talking about in St. Augustine. And I'm really curious how the British and Spanish colonists interact with each other. So we know there's evidence of trade and communication going on, but it's not something that people have really studied on a colonial level. So I'm really interested in looking more at that and kind of figuring out what the daily life was like for those people and how much the people in St. Augustine were in contact with the people in Charleston or Philadelphia or Williamsburg or Boston. What were their thoughts on each other and how did they see each other?
I like that because you hear about like the big, the raids where the British came in and burned down the city of St. Augustine, but you know, it couldn't have always just been fighting. Like there's other things, like we see evidence of you know, British things here in St. Augustine. So they're, you know, it's always more complicated relationships, right?
One of my favorite stories in St. Augustine, actually, in the 18th century, there were three guys They were British, and they were caught coming into St. Augustine with merchandise. They were trying to smuggle it in and sell it because this is illegal in the Spanish colonies. And so they get caught, their goods get confiscated, they're imprisoned for several days or weeks. They're finally released, and then the governor ends up selling the confiscated goods. So you have a lot of kind of these weird, fun trade things going on in St. Augustine where no one really knows what's going on or why, but they get the stuff, so they're fine with it.
That's awesome. Well, what's your favorite tool when you do some of this research?
So my favorite tool right now, and when I say favorite tool, this actually lives in my handbag when I'm out in libraries or working around the house, and it is a digital photo scale. It's in metric, of course, because all good things are in metric. And this one happens to have this nifty aluminum back, so I don't have to worry about it getting beat up or banged up or anything. And as a nerd, I actually do use it when I'm measuring things around the house that are small. I will pull it out and try, and if I can't find a ruler, I always know where this thing is. So this is probably my favorite tool at the moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, we have plastic cards, and they always like blow away in a half second before you get the shutter pushed down. So,
well, it's aluminum, so it's still pretty light, but I think it's a little more substantial than the plastic things.
yeah,
I've used coins in the past. I got stuck one time in a museum and was not expecting to get access to the artifacts, and I didn't have any scale. So I just had to use Euro coins. And so that's why I started carrying it with me everywhere, because you never know when you're gonna get a chance to photograph some broken piece of pottery.
yes, 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 definitely. Well, do you have a best, worst field story that you can now laugh about?
This is a great question, and I had trouble narrowing it down to just one. I think the one that has stuck with me the most, probably because it involves multiple senses. I was doing some cultural resource management, or CRM, as archaeologists like to call it. And essentially, this is what archaeologists do when there's some construction project going on, and the person doing the construction wants to make sure that they're not going to destroy any archaeological sites or ruin any piece of history that's important. And so I was working with a company that did a lot of this kind of work, and several of our jobs happened to be in this town in Hopewell, Virginia. And Hopewell is a town. It's on the river. There are parts of it that are gorgeous. You have beautiful river views. You've got a lot of historic homes and mansions, but you also have a lot of factories. And I think DuPont has a factory there. Honeywell may or may not still have a factory there, but there are a lot of industrial corners of the town. And as a result, it's one of those towns that you kind of smell before you see. And this one project that we were working on happened to be at the wastewater treatment plant. There was quite a bit of land surrounding the wastewater treatment plant. And I don't know what they were doing that necessitated us to dig out there, but we were out there digging. And we were doing what's called a survey. So it's kind of like archaeological battleship, where you have a grid and you dig along the grid and try to figure out what stuff is where. And so we were given these lines, and we were told to go and go down the lines, and the woods were really dense. So some of us had machetes. So one day after lunch, I was done. I'd had enough of this very intense smell. And fortunately, I had a hole that had licorice root in it. And if you're not familiar with licorice root, it is exactly what you would expect it to smell like. It smells like the licorice candy. And I'm not a big fan of licorice candy, but I love licorice root. And so I was really excited. I knew that sometimes you'd catch it and sometimes you wouldn't, and this hole had it. So I remember laying down on the ground and sticking my head into the hole. And it had that wonderful kind of spring dirt smell with the licorice root. I mean, it was amazing. I loved it. And it was just so much better than whatever was going on outside the hole. So I'm laying there with my head stuck in this hole. And my coworker comes along and thinks I've passed out, or I'm ill, or I found something really cool. They're not quite sure what's going on. So they come over and they're really concerned. And I remember sitting up, and I don't remember if I was embarrassed or if it was just kind of, I was done with the smell and I was beyond anything embarrassing, but I just remember telling them I had licorice root in my hole and it smelled a lot better. And so I was just going to be down there for a few minutes. And I think after that, everyone started smelling their holes to see if they'd gotten anything that smelled better than the downwind area. But that probably is my best worst field story. And the smell of licorice root, fortunately, is not associated with that, but I still love it.
It's a really good story, and it's a good reminder. Often when we go do a lot of these surveys, it's not the best part of town or the prettiest. It's not the properties that they're saving because they're pristine and great and wonderful. It's like right next to the other gross development, and it's never the funnest.
Power lines. Yeah, there's all sorts of fun places to dig.
Yes. Well, our big question, how do you think archaeology can help save the world?
I'm sure others have said something similar, but for me, archaeology is kind of the superpower of history. It's a way to figure out what happened in the past so that we don't repeat it. But it's also a way to give voices to the voiceless. So you get a lot of people that aren't represented in the archaeological record, whether they were illiterate or they were poor or they were children and didn't know how to read yet, enslaved individuals. You get all sorts of different groups that might not be documented in texts or might not be able to document themselves. They're referenced, but it's other people talking about them. But what everyone has in common is that we all use stuff. And so we're all able to find the stuff that these people used, and it's a way to connect with those people. You can hold the dishes that they used, or the dolls that they might have played with, or the marbles, or the tools. And so it's a way to really connect with the past on a deeply personal level that brings it alive in ways that really nothing else can.
Yeah, I like to tell the kids when I do programs that people do the number one thing that they do everywhere throughout all history is make trash. And that's what we find is trash and those items. And
yeah, and even animals. If you think about your own household today, the animals are not represented in the texts, but you're going to have a dog bowl and a leash and a cat toy and a bird cage. And so you can get really weird aspects of the past that you wouldn't necessarily think about studying from archaeology.
Yeah, very, very good answer. Good thoughts. So we do have a bonus question. What has been keeping you sane lately?
Well, I've been spending a lot of time with my family, the four-legged and the two-legged variety, and they're wonderful, but I have rediscovered a love of weaving. And it's something I did when I was in elementary school. I wove for years and put it down for a really long time because I got a loom that was a little more complicated than I could handle. And then this winter I rediscovered it. And so my family is really sick of getting scarves. But I made some baby blankets for some friends. I made a bag recently. I tried to do a throw blanket and it kind of overgrew. So now I have a bedspread. So I've been really having a lot of fun making things and going through my yarn stash.
That's awesome. I'm a knitter, so I've been doing lots and lots of knitting, and I keep trying to use up like the little bits of my yarn stash. I'm like, oh, it's summer now. I'll make this tank top and it won't take as much yarn. And then I'll get like almost done. I'm like, well, now I need to buy another skein of the yarn to finish the project that was supposed to be using the like leftovers. So
I found some good patterns that you can make ornaments, like knitted Christmas ornaments, and they're supposed to use the little tiny balls that you have left. And weaving, actually, I've also done knitting and crocheting, and weaving is awesome, but it uses so much yarn. So you always end up with the little scraps. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with those.
Yeah, the never-ending quest for textile artists is what do you do with that little bit? So
yeah, well, and that's something that doesn't show up in archaeological records. So we're just doing our part to keep that alive currently.
Yes. Well, very cool. Thanks for chatting with us, and thanks to everyone following along at home. We'll see you next time. Cheers.